Let's look at text generation, which is one of the major tasks for large language models. Then we'll get into some of the others, such as text summarization and text classification. The code that I give you here lets you basically just set up some of the things that are needed. We're using LangChain for everything. And you'll need your OpenAI key in the secrets section of Colab. If you're not using Colab, then figure out some other way to get that get that environmental variable defined. So text generation. We're going to look at a couple of examples here. I'm going to do kind of a hypothetical sort of case. I don't actually use this case, but it's close to something you would see in academia. So I get frequent requests for letters of recommendation. And this is a task that certainly you could use it as a writing assistant. You wouldn't want to say just write a random letter of recommendation. That would be horrible. But you could take, say, the points that you know about a particular student and then request that the large language model write that letter of recommendation. Now, we'll see how to overcome some of the shortcomings that approach might have. Because, for example, it may not fit the tone that you have as a professor to write it. Also, it may not, it might not fit sort of the overall format that maybe a different institution was expecting. So to overcome that, you use things like one shot, many shots, sort of how do you provide it with sort of an example to help it with the tone. So what you want to do here is set up and run this code, because this code, we've worked with this before. This is just really the boilerplate code that I use to generate these responses. So it's basically setting up for a system prompt. You see the results here. You might want to modify this one even to say you are a assistant to a professor at a university or something such as that. We're going to deal with text generation patterns, and this is a very important thing to know. This would be an easy interview question if you're talking to somebody about large language models, just to see, okay, do you know anything about this whatsoever? You could say, explain the difference between zero shot, one shot, and few shot as it applies to large language models. And this really deals with how much background information you're giving it or you're potentially training it with. Zero shot means you're letting the foundation model do everything. You're just saying, write a letter of recommendation according to these points. You're assuming it knows what a letter of recommendation is. You're assuming the foundation model knows everything except for maybe the key points on that student. So let's look first at zero shot. So here is the prompt that I am giving it. Generate a positive letter of recommendation. So I'm telling them overall, here's my assessment of the student, positive, for John Smith, a student of mine and that's one of my classes. I tell it my name because that's important. He is applying, and this is important too, you're giving them the pronouns. You always want to give them the pronouns, certainly for diversity reasons, but also just because it's just not going to know. Names like Alex or Tracy, you can't just, you never want to infer the pronoun from the name. So you don't want the computer to do it because it will gladly do it. If you give it a name that is more commonly he, her, or he, him versus her, she, that's going to be, it's just going to pick the most common case for that name and go with it. And then I put in basically the student's letter. So below is the request, because often the student will put in some information on this. You'd probably want to give it other information on the student. I mean, if you were really going to do this sort of thing, this is something I don't really think you should use LLMs for, but it is it's an example. So then it gives you the response, model response. It is with great pleasure that I write this letter of recommendation for John Smith, a former student of mine at Washington University in St. Louis. I had the privilege of teaching John and blah, 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 blah. And it goes on and on and on. It's not at all the tone I would use for a letter of recommendation. I usually, it is with great pleasure that I write this letter. That's just not how I write letters. It's just me. So I could do a one-shot example here, and this is what I'm going to do. Here, this is what one shot, and all we're changing is the prompts on these for one shot, two shot, or one shot, few shot, many shot. So this we're giving it just one example. And I say generate a positive letter recommendation. All that's the same. He is blah, blah, blah. And I asked to format it in Markdown. And then I say this is an example letter recommendation written by me. And yeah, this is usually how I start one out. To whom it may concern, and John earned an A+ in my course, blah, 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 blah. So I give just the very basic kind of information there. I've known them for this long, so on and so forth. And then letters of recommendation that I write usually are almost like two categories. One is just a student that I just don't know that well. I know that they've passed my course and did quite well. That's one type. And then students who have been an intern or a TA for me or something like that. There, I can write a whole lot. So this is more the format that I use if it's somebody that I've just had for one semester, maybe talked to them a few times, versus somebody that I really got to know and I know their academic pursuits and things like that. So those are the kind of things that definitely the LLM will not pick up on. Then I say, and then here's the data that I gave before. Here's the detail that the student provided. And then it writes the response. It still doesn't quite change up the tone too much. If I was going to really use it in this capacity, I would probably start to give it, I would break this down. I would say, here are some examples of, I would go more few shot. I would give it some specific examples of the input. And then here is the few shot. You can give it just multiple examples of letters that I've written in the past. And now the response is getting, this sounds a lot more like me. I am writing to highly recommend, so on, and it basically provides all of the information. So this is just an example of few shot, many shot using text generation to as one of the major tasks of a large language model. Thank you for watching this video, and please like if this was useful to you, and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss many of my other projects and updates to this course as we go through this semester. Thank you very much.